When Lily came back from her week-long work trip, she expected to find the usual: a warm house, her husband Daniel reading in the living room, and the faint smell of coffee in the air. Instead, she walked into silence. The house felt colder, emptier. Furniture stood where it always had, but something about the air told her that something had changed. She called out Daniel's name, half expecting him to appear from the kitchen with his usual grin. But no one answered. She walked through each room, her heart beating faster with every step. The drawers were closed, the bed neatly made, and the hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint. Then she saw it, a single envelope on the dining table with her name written in Daniel's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short letter. Asterisk, Lily, this isn't goodbye. I just need time, to think, to breathe, to remember who we were before we lost ourselves in work and silence. I hope one day we'll find each other again, not out of habit, but out of choice. Asterisk. She sank into the nearest chair, reading the words over and over. It wasn't anger that filled her, it was the quiet realization that he was right. They had been drifting apart for months. Quick breakfasts, late-night meetings, polite conversations that felt like echoes of something that used to be alive. She had thought they were fine because nothing was wrong, but in truth, nothing was right either. Days turned into weeks. Lily went through the motions: work, sleep, repeat. At first, she kept expecting Daniel to call. Then she began to understand his silence was his way of saying he needed to heal, not just escape. She thought about the letter often, about how gentle it was despite the pain it carried. It wasn't rejection, it was reflection. Over time, Lily started to rebuild her rhythm. She joined a local art class, started going on evening walks, and reconnected with her younger sister, whom she hadn't seen in months. Slowly, she began to see how much of herself she had set aside for the routine of being busy. For the first time in years, she asked herself what made her happy, not as a wife, but as a person. Months passed quietly. One evening, as she walked home from work, she passed by a small bookstore with a familiar scent of old paper and wood. Something about it reminded her of Daniel, the way he used to lose himself in books. She walked in, and her eyes fell on a display table featuring a collection of local authors. Her breath caught when she saw one of the covers, asterisk 8 months apart. Asterisk, the author's name was Daniel. She froze for a moment before gently picking it up. The first page carried a note, asterisk, to the woman who taught me that silence can speak, and that love is not possession but understanding. Asterisk, her eyes blurred. It wasn't just a book, it was his way of reaching out. She bought a copy and sat in a nearby cafe, reading it cover to cover. It wasn't about them directly, but every chapter carried pieces of their story. Two people who had lost touch with themselves before learning to listen again. It wasn't bitter. It was honest, humble, and filled with hope. That night, she sent a message she had typed and deleted 100 times before, asterisk, I read your book. Asterisk, a few minutes later, her phone buzzed with a reply, asterisk, then you already know everything I wanted to say. Asterisk. They met a week later at that same bookstore. When Daniel walked in, he looked older, calmer, perhaps, but his eyes still carried the warmth she remembered. They didn't rush to hug or apologize. They simply talked. He told her about the cabin he had rented during those 8 months, where he had written, thought, and learned to slow down. She told him about her art classes and how she had started painting again. Neither of them spoke about getting back together immediately. It wasn't about rebuilding the same life, it was about building a new one, brick by brick, with more patience and honesty. Daniel smiled softly and said, maybe this time, we can find each other, not out of routine, but because we want to. Lily nodded, tears welling up, but they were tears of peace, not pain. As they walked out of the bookstore together, the evening breeze brushed against them gently, like a quiet promise. They weren't who they used to be, and maybe that was the point. Love had changed, and so had they. But now it was stronger, not loud, not dramatic, just quietly real. 8 months of distance had taught them that love doesn't fade when people grow, it only transforms. And sometimes, the space between two hearts isn't an ending. It's simply the distance love needs to breathe again.